A lot of times when we hire a VA, it is truly a cost center. And what we don't realize is how much that cost is taking away from our pay as usually a solopreneur, when we're pretty early in that stage, and saying, hey, is that really the best use of this money at this time? And part of it is because, first off, getting a VA up to speed usually is a multi-month, kind of piece. So it's going to be cost. You're not going to see benefit right away. You're just not, unless you happen to stumble across the unicorn, which will happen, but it's rare.
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how. Do you feel guilty about hiring support staff because they don't directly bring in revenue? So today, you're going to learn why this mindset might actually be holding your business back from sustainable growth. I'm Tonya Kubo, back again with business operations expert extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, and today we are talking about a super tricky aspect of business growth. It's something that I call the tension between cost centers and revenue centers, which, if that's a new terminology for you, don't worry, we gotcha. But Gwen, I want to start us off by giving my definition of the terms, and then I'm going to turn it over to you to, bestow us all with brilliance and stuff. Sound good?
No pressure.
No pressure at all. Okay, so my experience, so I had never heard of the term cost center and revenue center until I was working at a university, and the university had this, I want to say long-standing, but it wasn't an everyday conversation, but it kept bubbling up over the years related to their childcare center, right? So a lot of universities have childcare centers. It's a great employee, recruitment tool. It's a great employee retention tool because finding childcare is hard. And every now and then, say every 3 to 5 years, it would come up on whether the university should keep managing the childcare center or whether they should outsource the management of it. And it always came down to money because the childcare center wasn't making money. And in many cases, it wasn't breaking even. And it wasn't until they got a director of operations in who spoke about childcare centers. And he said, any university you go to, there's cost centers and there's revenue centers. There are aspects of operations that are going to always run in the red. They're never going to be self-sustaining. And you know that, and you're okay with that, and you build subsidies around it. And in his specific example, he was like, catering, conventions, events, and such tend to be revenue centers at universities where the profit margin is really, really high. It brings in way more revenue than it costs to operate. And in a lot of times, if you put the two side by side, you'll find that your catering revenue more than accounts for any gap in profit on the cost center side of the childcare center. And so that's how he felt that they balanced each other out. And he made this great case for how not every department division needs to run in the black. So that was my first exposure to it. And I was just like, oh, okay. And what that did in my head as an entrepreneur is made me go, oh, so there are going to be times in my business where I'm using profit from one thing to cover the cost of another thing, because not every line item on the budget is going to completely balance out. How do you view the difference? Or tell me where I'm wrong, because sometimes I'm wrong.
Oh, well, no, you're not wrong. You're not wrong at all. And typically something like a cost center versus a revenue center or income center, depending on, the terms that people use, generally is going to be for a much larger organization, right?
Yeah.
Right. Because we don't think of our businesses as centers when, we have less than 20 people, which is who I anticipate the bulk of our listeners are.
Fair enough.
We probably have some corporate people that listen in just because they find it interesting and welcome you. But but our focus really is that smaller business owner. But the concept is still the same, right? That early on, we get very focused on all the things that are bringing in income, revenue, whatever term you want to use. And rightly so, because you can't keep operating, unless you have some other form of subsidy coming in, whether it be, I've got a really nice retirement account that I'm taking money out and, and I just put it in the business and it lets me do the thing I love. Okay, great for you. But we're actually talking about sustainable businesses that are businesses that anybody would want to run, not just the folks who can, financially support a business that's running in the red. And so that revenue center is where everyone focuses early on. And often what will happen then is when it comes time to put something out that you can't tie immediately directly to the revenue, it gets very, very uncomfortable, because what it feels like, because it's actually what is true, is that cost is taking money out of your pocket as the owner. Okay?
Right.
Not quite the same when you're running a university because we don't have an owner in the same way. But I think that's where the tension comes in, because, just making up random numbers and not saying that any business would be working this way. It could be, I have no idea, but I'm just making up random numbers. If you've got $100,000 business and you don't have anybody else working in it, there's still some costs, but you're probably putting a big chunk of that $100,000 annual income into your pocket, right? Like I said, you've got other costs, you've got, SaaS subscriptions and, some other things and whatnot, but there's a big chunk that's probably going into your pocket or benefiting you directly in some way. But as soon as you hire someone who is not creating more revenue to pay for themselves, typically that first person is a VA, right? It's often what we hear. They're probably not creating direct revenue. Now, they may be freeing up for you to be able to create more revenue, but usually that doesn't happen right away either. Even in the best circumstances, that's usually a 3 to 6 month out kind of thing, where that investment of that person is allowing you to grow the business, in a different way. And so it's like, I'm paying them X amount. I'm just going to pick a random number. I don't care what it really is, how little or much you use them. But let's say I'm paying them $500 a month to do work, right? And all of a sudden it's like, well, that's $6,000 that's now not going into my pocket. Right? And that gets very disheartening, because it's like, well, but that's like, 10% or 20% of what I was taking out of the business. And now I'm not getting that money. Right. And so it's like, so where does it pay off? And the first thing we think is like, well, they need to be making sure that I'm making that money, which often they can. But this is one of the reasons that I've made the statement many times of maybe the first person you hire isn't a VA.
Yeah. Okay. And we've talked about that on the show before. I mean, we've talked about that on LinkedIn and in various locations. What I would love for you to help us understand, because I think you explain it really well on like why a VA isn't necessarily the best first hire. But I would love to hear you explain it in the frame here of this cost center, revenue center concept.
Yeah. So the problem with hiring a VA, and it's not that anyone who's listened to the show for more than a few minutes knows that I am not about that this is the absolute right answer. Lots of right answers. And so this may or may not be the right answer for you. But a lot of times when we hire a VA, it is truly a cost center And what we don't realize is how much that cost is taking away from our pay as usually a solopreneur, when we're pretty early in that stage, and saying, hey, is that really the best use of this money at this time? And part of it is because, first off, getting a VA up to speed usually is a multi-month, kind of piece. So it's going to be cost. You're not going to see benefit right away. You're just not, unless you happen to stumble across the unicorn, which will happen, but it's rare. So don't.
If you're a big systems person and you already have like ironclad, buttoned up SOPs, checklists, the whole 9 yards, maybe you can get somebody up to speed in 3 months. But I haven't seen any VA be able to show up today and be at full speed tomorrow.
Even with people who actually have really good systems.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. It's like the fastest I've seen somebody get onboarded with like the best systems and the best onboarding process has been 3 months.
Yeah, I would say the same. So that's one aspect, right? That there is going to be some runway that they need to get up to speed. So that's one of the issues with it. And we often aren't prepared for that runway, that this is going to cost us money. I mean, really, truly cost us money. And we're not going to really see the benefit. Now, the other piece of it that's tied to that is folks always are telling you, hey, get this low level stuff off your plate. Whatever it is, your calendar, your email, whatever you define as the low level stuff. But my question always is, if you're not doing that, are those hours actually exchanged for true income generating hours? And so when someone is at 50% capacity, hiring a VA is probably not a good idea, because they're trading part of their other 50%, which isn't making money, for a cost that is taking money.
Right.
Right. And so that whole let's hire a VA is like, you need to be closer to 80 to 90% capacity, so that getting up that giving up some of that time now is actually being filled with more income creating time. And so I think the issue is, when is it appropriate to allocate the cost center versus the revenue center?
All right. Well, you asked a really good question. How about you answer it now?
Well, and so you're welcome.
I was like, yeah, I had a question, but this one's better. You should do that.
So the reality of that is, really is looking at how full are you and what are you trading off? Right? Because if you're trading off your time that's not being filled with revenue, well, that time, for practical purposes costs you zero. But even if you're hiring a really inexpensive VA, you're still paying them something, whether it's $10 an hour or $20 an hour or 30, it doesn't matter. You're still paying them something. So now not only is it not zero, it's more, right? It's costing you more. And back to that 3 to 6 month onboarding time probably is still also taking your chunk of time as well.
Right.
Right. So you aren't really getting your time back, and it's costing you money. Right. So that's the place. So often when folks are really getting to capacity, the first person I actually have them hire is someone who can take on some of the capacity, which is a contrary thought for most people, because it's like, well, now that's money not in my pocket. But if, and you do this for me in some cases as well, where I hire you as a subcontractor consultant working at what I'm going to call an equivalent level. You've got different skills, and often that's the beauty of bringing you in. But I'm paying you for that kind of work. I don't make as much money on it, but I'm also not paying you the full rate either, which because that's part of the business model that you just can't do that, right? But I'm still making some money, but I got that full time back. I got that full hour back to do something else. Now, often in our case, it's because I'm on vacation, attending another event. There's lots of other things that are happening. It's not necessarily because I'm at 100%, but maybe I am 100% this week.
Right.
Right. And so I'm trading some time for money, and I'm trading at a much higher rate than I would for a VA, but I'm still making some money on it. And I'm being very cautious about where that is so that you're also a revenue center.
Right.
Right. And so looking at those two places and saying, when does that make sense? It does not currently, where I am in my business model, make sense to bring you on as a revenue center all the time.
Right.
Because I'm not at 100% all the time. But we were just talking about it yesterday, that we can see that happening relatively soon. And it was like, how do we offboard? And it was like, oh, well, there's these things that, I can do. You were saying this, Tonya can do. And it would make sense to do that, to bring you in as a revenue center. But because of our working relationship, at some points, you're also a cost center.
Right.
And I'm okay with both. And I understand where the two pieces are. And deciding which one makes sense at any given point in time is the bigger picture. But if you've only been doing revenue center type things, that cost center piece gets very, very scary.
Yeah. And so, I feel like we've done a good job of talking about the balance of a revenue center versus a cost center for the solopreneur. And I appreciate that we've done that because, my heart there is with the solopreneur. And because I've made a bad first hire before, right? Not that the hire I made was bad, right? It's just I didn't know what I didn't know at the time. And I made the wrong decision for the business at that given time. I think, however, the problem that I anticipate many of our listeners encountering is that they're not a solopreneur, right? They've already got, say, a team of 3, and now they're looking at expanding. And then it's hard because you do have to be, I think, very, very specific. Like everybody has to earn their right at the table when it's a delightfully tiny team of 3. But then as you start to expand to 4, to 5, to 6, to 7 is where I think you are bringing on one role that might have to shift your thinking, where everybody else had to earn their right at the table in terms of the revenue or the revenue that they freed up. This next hire, and I'm specifically thinking of support people, I'm thinking of operations directors, where a lot of times there's efficiencies that are cost savings, but they're hard to identify. So help me understand that. Let's now go to the scenario where we've got a team of 3 and we're scaling up to 5. What does that look like?
Well, this is where we're actually putting in some management kind of layer. And when I say that, I know at least half of our audience went, whoa, because they probably became an entrepreneur because they didn't want that management layer.
They didn't want people. They became an entrepreneur because they didn't want people, and now they have people.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's also part of the reason why I ask the questions I ask of my clients early on is, if they really didn't want people, let's make sure we design the business so you really don't have to have very many people. And when they say, I want a $10 million business, but I don't want any people, it's like, I'd love to help you. I have no idea how to do that.
Could probably get them to 2.5 million though.
I could easily get them to early 7s, but I'm not sure I can get them to 8-figure number.
Yeah, I'm there with you. Like 8 figures is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, it's a whole different ballgame. And so that is part of the thing, is that there's somebody in there who actually is creating efficiency, but the efficiency isn't so easy to track 1-to-1-to-1. Like, their hour actually saved an hour over here, or their, their process saved, these other pieces, because it can be valuable in lots of different ways. It's not quite as one-to-one or, one to possibly many, but in a particular area. I'm thinking of one of my clients who has a relatively new operations director. They've been there now for a bit. And the things that she's bringing in is she's helping identify HR issues and dealing with those, which are across multiple departments. She's also actually seeing like how much are the actual costs of the service that they're providing, so that she can say, we need to make sure that we're managing our pricing properly. So that we're staying profitable from that standpoint. She's also looking at developing, systems and consistent behaviors, because her entrepreneur, like most entrepreneurs, are highly creative and visionary. And so lots and lots of, we just kind of do it the best way every time. And it's like, well, the best way every time is actually the same way every time. Right.
Yeah.
So then there's the customer experience piece. Is the customer getting a more consistent service or product, which does affect revenue, but hard to tell sometimes, because often when you lose a customer, what they say is the reason that they left and the actual reason that they left aren't necessarily aligned, because I don't want to say you pissed me off. Right. Or, you did this thing and it really, it was just annoying enough times that I said I was done. Not like I'm actually mad, but it's like, it's just not worth my time, my time and effort. All of those things actually are part of the revenue piece, but it's really hard to tie it to the revenue piece. And so her job looks like only a cost.
Yeah. Well, and I'm also thinking, so the same would be true. I think anybody who's running an agency, regardless of how many people are in their agency, at some point will have to hire somebody who manages like some aspect of the clients, right? Like their whole job is going to be making sure that we do what we say we're going to do to all of our clients.
Right.
And that person, while you and me would look at that person and go, oh yeah, that person is somebody who is driving revenue. I don't think it would look like that to anybody else who wanted to itemize salaries.
Right. Because it's like, but what are they actually doing? They're not we're not billing the client for their time. Or we're not billing the client for all of their time.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the challenge, particularly with smaller organizations. And in my world, smaller organizations is probably 10-ish sort of people, maybe 20, but in that kind of, 10-ish or a little bit under range, is often a person who is a cost center also is a revenue center. And what people get focused on is how can I make it more revenue based? Right. So using your agency example, which I love, is we might bill for part of their time as customer as customer management or program management, or, however you want to call it. We may bill for part of that time, but there's still a whole lot of back end work that they have to do that probably really isn't billable. But going back to your very original example, the overall profitability should be covering that expense. Right. And, people will know, if they know much about me at all, know that I'm going to talk about profit first here, because that's part of the OpEx expense that you're expected to have to allocate. There are some expenses that go with it. And although it's different, it also is not different than paying for a user license for a particular software as a service. Right. It's part of the expense. You don't pass that through to your client because you know that that's just what has to be done. But there are always going to be some operational expenses, and being able to going back to what I was saying early, understanding, do you have the profitability, and are you willing to sacrifice some portion of the profitability for a period of time, and then being able to figure out, are things actually getting better? So using the agency example again, when we actually start getting having them help, are we seeing that our direct support people in the agency are actually working faster? Right? Are they being more efficient? Are we still able to charge the same amount, but we actually aren't having to pay our direct person quite as much time?
Right.
Because they're still getting the same result, but now they, something I know you and I've talked about many, many times is now that direct service person isn't having to go back and forth and say, hey, no, I need this from you. No, I need this from you. No, I need this from you. No, I need this from you, which is an interruption in their day. And so they're not being as efficient with all the rest of their work, where now you've got someone whose job is to do all the interruptive work.
Right. Yeah.
You're smiling, which means you're thinking about a concept.
Well, what I was thinking is, as I was listening to you, part of what I was thinking is, I think this is where in some cases, this is where software as a service can either replace a potential hire or buy you some time before you need to make a hire. For example, I'm thinking of like typical VA/EA roles or duties, say like calendaring. You could get a booking tool like Calendly or Acuity or whatever, and that could delay your need to hire somebody to book your client appointments for you, right? Just letting the client book on your calendar. That would be one way to buy yourself some time. There are some softwares out there that will give you some measure of workflow management that's automated. I'm a big believer in you still need to appoint somebody to like monitor the workflow to make sure it's doing its job, because automation's great. But there's definitely some ways I can hear in what you're saying to test the waters. Before humans are involved. Because while there's a process to onboarding a human, right? To finding the right human for the job and onboarding them and getting them up to speed. There's also a process of determining if they're not the right fit and transitioning from one human to another human. And software sometimes is a little bit easier to transition between. But I'm curious, aside from that point, can you think of some signs in a business that say, hey, it's time for me to hire a person whose job is more administrative, more behind the scenes than actually front of house, responsible in some way of adding money into the bank account?
I think there's a couple signs. So the first is how full, what is your capacity? And when I'm saying capacity, I actually mean billable capacity. Like if you actually removed hours from your, if there's things that you really truly weren't having to do, do you have enough wait list, whatever that looks like, in the wings that you would fill that up with billable hours? To me, that's one of the things that you're going to look for. Okay. Because like I said, if you're at 50%, you probably don't need to be bringing anybody in. The other often is about quantity of people. So if you've got a number of employees or subcontractors or a combination of both, and usually it's somewhere in the 5 to 10 range, you're probably, as CEO, spending a lot of time doing management of those people. And back to, that's probably taking time away, because if you've got that number of subcontractors, you probably have enough business. You're probably losing income because of the time that you're spending doing that. You're probably not doing your best highest level, unique ability, genius level, whatever term you want to put to it, work, unless managing people is your genius and is your unique ability that you really, really love. That's almost never true with entrepreneurs. So, because that's usually not, it's generally not what they love, right? I'm not saying they can't be, but back to, is it, excellence versus, actual genius. So those are the couple places that that you normally start seeing it. There can be other situations, and it can be because the stuff that I really know has to happen, that is, day-to-day kind of stuff, I just avoid like the plague.
Right.
And even if you're not full, if you're not getting that done, then you're probably never going to get full. Right. And so sometimes it's a personality thing, but I think that's way, way more rare on the list. People are like, oh, I hate being in an email. I hate doing my calendar. I hate it. And it's like, how much do you really hate it? Like, do you not ever actually look at your email? And it's like, no, I look at it. Just, I feel like I could use my time better. Well, you might, but it's not like emails are going unanswered for 3 or 4 weeks at a time.
Right.
But if that was the case, you need someone in there that's actually managing that for you.
Right. Okay, I have a feeling I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you have, what I really want is a formula. I'm not going to lie, but I'm going to ask for some strategies that a business owner of any size, but let's just say, 3 to 10 employees or 3 to 10 team members, strategies that a business owner could use to maybe build out a balanced team structure?
Oh, that's going to be another context matters.
I was like, because what I want you to say is for every 5, bring on 1. Yeah. But I know you're not going to say that, but I want you to say that, Gwen, okay?
I'm not going to say that. Because it really does. Context matters. It has a lot to do with your business model. It has a lot to do with the product or service that you're offering. It has a lot to do with the type and level of people that you're bringing in. Are you bringing in folks that are, newer in their career path? Or are you bringing in folks that are more experienced in their career path? All of those things matter. I do think over time, you can be watching and saying, is the person that I bring in that's really more of a cost center as opposed to a revenue center person, am I actually seeing a change in my revenue? And if you are, without any other change, then they probably actually are making a positive difference in your revenue. And I will say there's a couple of books that actually talk about this to some degree. Okay. I'll list out 3.
Okay, hold on. You have to say them slowly because I have to write them down for the show notes.
Yeah. So one is the 3.3 rule.
Okay.
And I can't tell you who the author is.
It's okay. I'll look it up.
I know
it'll be in the show notes, listeners.
The other is simple numbers, straight talk, big profits.
Is that another book or is that the same?
It's another book.
Okay.
And then the third book is All In.
Okay, I think you gave me more here. So
All In is Mike Michalowicz, and the middle book is Greg Crabtree. And like I said, the first one, I can't remember the author and I can't see it from where I'm standing. If anyone's watching, they're going to see me keep looking over to like my bookshelf, which I can't see.
I wrote down 3.3 rule is one book. Simple numbers is one book.
Simple numbers, straight talk, big profits. That's
okay. That was all the title. Got it. Okay. And then All In is the third.
Yeah.
I was like, is that a subhead? What is that? Okay. So
and they're all looking at it a little bit differently, but all of them, there are elements where they're looking at hiring people and making sure that it's actually a good financial hire.
Oh, okay. That's good. That's good. And, in the show notes, I'm going to put a little plug for the Small Biz Book Club since we're talking about books, because that's where we get together and talk about books like this every single month.
It is.
So, and if you're just listening and don't like to look at show notes, because I've heard some listeners are like that, it's smallbizbookclub.com. Very easy to find. Okay, Gwen, we have to
So
stop.
that's my answer. My answer
Okay.
is I'm not going to give you an answer.
Yeah. And I equally love and hate that about you, just so we're clear. Okay. And I'm glad we can still be friends, despite my mixed feelings on not getting a concrete answer that I can write in stone and like live with and cuddle up with for the rest of my life. All right, listeners, we have been talking about why not every role in your business needs to drive revenue. In fact, if you want to build a sustainable team structure, you've got to come to terms with the fact that not every function in your business can even possibly be a revenue center. But that just by the very nature, some will be cost centers, some will be revenue centers. Obviously, we all want more revenue than we have costs. That's what makes profit. That's what makes real businesses. But it is a balance. Sometimes that manifests, like we were talking about today, support roles, project management roles. At agencies, it's the person who coordinates all the work of the agency. Those are some easy places. We've given you some tips of how to know if you're at the point where you need to be looking at hiring a person where their whole job isn't necessarily tied to revenue. And, if you're facing this kind of dilemma in your business, I would say from Gwen, my first recommendation is breathe. It's okay. We all get to this bridge. We all have to walk across it one way or the other. And then the second thing is to really look at your current team structure. Take a look. Go back and listen to the beginning of the episode if you need to, but look at your capacity, your billable capacity. Look at the number of people and look at, is there stuff that needs to be getting done that just isn't? And it's getting in the way of your success. So that's as concrete as it gets today. We want to thank you for listening and want to let you know that we have something special that we are doing. It's going to be starting in 2025. So if you're listening to this at some point in time in 2025 or into the future, it's already there. If you go to everydayeffectiveness.com/impact, we have an opportunity for you to engage in our simplest form of accountability with both me and Gwen. So be looking at the show notes for those details, and we will see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallyWant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.